Hi, Garland Nixon here. It's Friday morning, and we have back the one and only Joti Brar. We got one or two things to talk about. Let's talk. Hello, Garland Nixon here with the one and only Joti Brar, and we haven't had Joti on for a while, which means all kinds of terrible things have been going on, but we've got a lot to talk about, and we want to try to get Joti's perspective on what's happening. Let's go dive right into it, Joti Brar. Let's start here. The imperialists seem to be, I always look for signs of desperation. What I think a lot of people will see as signs of power, I see it signs of desperation. So currently, you're familiar with what happened to Richard Medhurst. I'm no question. I'm sure Scott Ritter, the raid on his home, and who knows, maybe pending charges against him. Recently, Professor Danny Shaw, a good friend of mine, came from some kind of a Palestinian film festival. When he got to Chicago, they grabbed him, took him to a back room and questioned him, with no regard for what's supposed to be constitutional rights. They clearly violated what should be constitutional rights, right? He said he didn't want to talk, and they said, well, you can't leave until you talk. That's a clear violation of the Constitution. They don't seem to care. We see this everywhere. People being arrested for tweets and Facebook posts and just saying, I'm opposed to genocide. Your thoughts on what does this all mean to you, Joti?
Well, Garland, I think you're right that it is a sign of desperation. God, I haven't got one right in front of me. Our latest newspaper for the party, the front page basically says, because we have a new Labour government, right? Labour means repression, racism, and war. And what we find is these things go together for a reason. And the reason is that the system, the capitalist economic system globally, which is the imperialist system, is in a really deep and deepening crisis. Not a lot of people really understand that the roots of all of what is happening in front of us are economic. There is a huge economic crisis, a crisis of profitability, a crisis of overproduction. There is an innate problem for the system, an inbuilt, ingrown problem, and that problem has become global and thereby kind of inescapable without some drastic measures. And those drastic measures involve trying to pass the burden of this crisis onto the working class. What does that mean? That means, number one, austerity. It means lowering wages as much as you possibly can. It means cutting back on all kinds of social spending as much as you possibly can in order to try to increase profitability by decreasing wages, whether that's wages in your pay packet or wages socially. Everything you spend on maintaining the infrastructure of a country is the social wage of the people that live in it, right? And we pay for it various different ways. But as far as the imperialists, the capitalists are concerned, all of that money spent is taken out of the pot that goes to profit. And they've got a crisis of being, a difficulty in generating profits right now. So everything they can do to push the burden of that onto the working class, they are doing. That's the austerity part. Then there's a need for a drive to war. War is about trying to restore profitability in this crisis by seizing new sources of raw materials and markets for making profit in from someone else, essentially, so that you can expand and somehow kickstart demand into your economy and keep growth going, growth of profits, which is the only growth that matters to the capitalists. They talk about growth as if it benefits everybody. And this is where I think some people get confused. Sorry, this is a bit of a bye, but I'll say it anyway in passing. A lot of people think that because the capitalists obsess about growth of profits, that the answer is anti-growth, or we don't want growth because growth is bad. Look at what the capitalists are doing to the planet to get growth. Yes, what the capitalists do to the planet and to human beings and to everything in order to get growth in their profits is insane and unsustainable. And, you know, we don't want that in our future. It doesn't help humanity. It might grow profits, but it doesn't grow the wealth that comes into the hands of the people. It doesn't make the lives of the people better. But we do want growth in the means of subsistence for the ordinary people. We want people's quality of life to get better. You know, a lot of the people who talk about degrowth, they're not talking to the super rich. They're talking to the poor and blaming them. These people are massively under-consuming. They don't get enough to get by on. And they're the ones who get subjected to lectures that they're consuming too much. No, that's not the case. So I won't go more into that. But anyway, you know, they need to bring back profitability to a crisis-ridden system. And that drives the drive to austerity, make the working class pay. It drives the drive to war, snatch from competitors or people who are just in your way, snatch hold of opportunities to loot and therefore make bonanzas and therefore bring back some profitability to your system, right? And there's a desperate need. The more mature this system gets, the more senile it becomes, the more its contradictions become so huge and obscene. We've talked about this before, you and I, Garland. The contradiction between the huge quantity of wealth that has amassed at one pole of the world in the hands of a tiny, tiny handful of people whose names we mostly don't know, and the mass of under-consuming, incredibly impoverished people who can barely survive. Many of them cannot survive. You know, people die in big numbers of starvation still in this modern world, despite the fact that we produce, I think, like twice as much food as is needed for all the people. I can't remember the exact number, but it's something insane, right? There's definitely more than enough food to feed everybody comfortably. We can produce everything people need. Why don't we? It's part of the contradiction of the system of production for profit, which we've talked about before. So there's this drive to war to try to restore profitability. And in order to carry on at the top of this system, there's also a need for racism and every other mechanism that will divide the working class. Because if you're pushing down on the working class and their conditions are getting worse, and let's face it, in the West, there are sections of the people whose lives have been getting worse very obviously for 40 years now. You know, so some places they're into like third generation unemployed and left behind, right? Very hopeless lives that they live because the industry that was exported from the places where they live was not replaced by anything. And so they're eking out, you know, very poor livings on benefits or, you know, rubbish, low paid, you know, part-time, whatever service jobs, and not able to have a decent life and not cared about by the state, by politicians, you know, by anybody. So people feel, they see their lives getting worse. They feel their lives getting worse. They feel the stress. They see that their kids have fewer opportunities, more debts, you know, and they're angry about that. And they are given scapegoats. This is nothing new. The Jews in Europe during the entirety of the Middle Ages and then into the capitalist period were the classic scapegoatable population when the rich wanted to divert the anger of the masses. They go, look, it's them. It's those people who are making you poor and making your lives hard. Not us, not we, the people who loot you. No, we're on your side. It's those people there. So racism plays that role. And racism in an imperialist world, in imperialist countries, plays a double role. Because on the one hand, it divides the population, which is being pushed down, against itself and keeps it infighting. On the other hand, it inculcates in a section of the population a fear and loathing of the very workers whose countries are being targeted abroad by imperialist wars. So we get Russophobia, Sinophobia, Islamophobia, right? All the villains in our movies are going to be Chinese, Russian, or Muslim, right? All the terrorists are Muslims. All the evil masterminds are Russian. You know, all of the sneaky whatever, they're Chinese, right? So we're trained, and then we have, you know, refugees coming to our countries from places that have been, you know, destroyed by imperialist war and imperialist looting. They are the most brutalized, most vulnerable victims of this system. And the poor in the countries they arrive in the West are encouraged to see them as the problem. And this is part of, you know, the need for this only deepens as the crisis deepens, Garland, so you said desperation, and that's right. There is a desperate feeling, in fact, in the ruling class for all their wealth, for all their, you know, assurance and confidence. They are smaller and smaller and smaller in number. And they need to keep this whole show on the road, despite the fact that increasing numbers of people have no faith in any aspect of this system. People don't trust anymore the pillars of the establishment. They used to buy into it. They used to believe the BBC. It was known as Auntie Beeb, right? You know, it was your friendly auntie. Now they hate the BBC, you know, and it's the same with every pillar. That we used to believe in friendly British bobbies, and now we know that the police are violent enforcers of ruling class control, right? So the courts, we used to believe in the fairness of the British justice system. Now we don't. Now we see how they're manipulated. We used to believe that politicians were there to serve people. Now we know they're there to line their pockets while serving the rich. So, you know, pillar after pillar of the establishment. You know, we used to believe that science was a neutral thing. Now we know that it's bought and paid for, right? So pillar after pillar of the establishment is not trusted. Then how do you keep control as a tiny minority ruling class in a crisis where life is necessarily getting worse for the working class? Like, if they could, I'm sure the ruling class would keep things nice for the workers. It works much better for them if there's social peace, right? The problem is they can't. That's a problem built into their system. It's not within their control. They can't keep everything nice for us. They have to attack our living standards in order to keep their profits coming. That means they've got to find ways to control us. So one is destroy our education system so we're easy to manipulate. One is, you know, feed us, you know, through our phones and whatever, all kinds of rubbish and nonsense and propaganda, or just crap entertainment, you know, Hollywood rubbish to just keep us looking the other way and kind of numb, you know, individually consuming or just putting up with our life and, you know, talking to no one except our phone. Keep us isolated, keep us ignorant so that we can be manipulated. For people who are angry, give them fake enemies. Point them to another bit of the working class to be angry with. Give them a narrative that says, if it wasn't for these Muslims, for these brown people who are turning up in actually quite tiny, but apparently enormous numbers, if there wasn't these hordes of invading, you know, military-aged Muslims coming to our shores on boats, you know, all the imagery around it is so emotive. If it wasn't for those people, you'd be able to get a doctor's appointment. You'd be able to get a job. You'd be able to, like, none of this stands up to any scrutiny. It works because it's repeated to people who don't receive real information. So it seems like it must be true. You hear it all the time. It must be true. The Labour Party, you know, which pretended to be on the side of those being attacked during the recent riots, just in the run-up to the election, Keir Starmer, I saw a clip of him and I can't quote it exactly, so forgive me, I have to paraphrase. He was sat in some meeting, you know, doing the Sooty thing, and it's doing that kind of community meet and greety kind of, oh, I'm talking to real people thing. And he made some reference to the problem of immigration and talked about, you know, so basically blaming the Tories that they have let immigration get out of control, right? So the Tories and Labour play this game of blaming each other for not being strict enough on immigration. And the message to the working people is, we have to get a handle on immigration, otherwise our life is being destroyed by immigrants. right? So that's the message. So they're fueling this message. And he specifically said something along the lines of these Bangladeshis not being removed. I don't remember what the context was or why Bangladeshis got singled out in particular. But, you know, so they're fueling all of this. They fuel it constantly, purposefully. It's very important for a state in crisis to be able to redirect the anger of its people so they are fighting themselves and not getting together and fighting the system. And alongside all of this, there's also the need for repression, because increasing numbers of people don't have faith, are not willing to simply toe the line and accept the propaganda and do as they're told, are pointing out the truth. As you've said, all the media and the journalists, the individuals, the political activists who are being targeted right now are people who align with the Palestine movement in some way or another, and who align with Russia in Ukraine. Why is that so much of a problem? You've pointed out yourself, Garland, and I think I heard you and Scott maybe talking yesterday. The things people are being arrested for saying are demonstrably true. And a court, didn't Scott say the courts or the judge in the Uhuru case basically said, it doesn't matter if it's true. Yes, okay, it's true, but it's still disinformation because it's against the government. So if the government lies, telling the truth is a crime. Now, this is the situation we're in. All these truth tellers are being targeted because telling the truth is dangerous. And it's particularly dangerous right now because these truths, at the heart of them, they have an anti-imperialist substance. The repression that Starmer is talking about introducing in Britain, he pretended was in response to racist riots that happened this summer in Britain. Now, these riots, as I've said to you, they're stoked endlessly by all our political parties, by the entire machinery of the British state and media. They stoke them all the time. The social media platforms knowingly allow disinformation to spread. It's a strategy of the ruling class. It's not an accident. It doesn't require new laws. Like that, it's already a crime to do those things. They do it knowingly because it's the strategy of the ruling class. They allow lies to spread. They allow people to stir up hatred, and then they go, "Oh, look, the far right, aren't they outrageous?" But it's the far right is a kind of bogeyman, if you like. They say nothing that is not the logical extension of what all the mainstream says, right? They have a particular job to do, to go into communities and mobilize working class people behind racist rhetoric and tell them your anger is justified, which it is. This is the reason for your problem, which it isn't. You know, it's the classic demagogue's trick, right? You say a true thing and you attach it that everybody knows and feels, and then you attach it to some rubbish, and people who don't know better are taken in by it. That's the entire strategy of fascism and all demagoguery. That's how it works, right? So we had these riots stoked by the ruling class and by their media against immigrants. And actually, the extent of the riots was actually massively overblown in terms of the reporting. They weren't nearly as big or as widespread as was made out to be, although definitely in some places they were pretty horrible. You know, there were people who were feeling scared to go out in certain communities. You know, I'm not saying it was okay, but it wasn't as big as it was made out to be. And the reason it was made out to be like a race war has broken out in Britain. And the reality is actually what was interesting. And the reason that the Labour Party, Starmer, could get away with saying they want to introduce these massively draconian measures which they say are to clamp down on these horrible racist acts. And some of it was really obscene. You know, I mean, trying to set fire to buildings with people inside them purely because those people are refugees is horrific. That's a nasty crime. That should definitely be punished according to, you know, all the laws we already have. There's no way that wasn't already a crime, right? There's no way the justice system needs overhauling and is unable to manage to prosecute people who try to murder people, right? So But they were able to get away with claiming that their new measures are in defense of, the victims of this nasty violence, precisely because the truth is, majority of British people, despite many decades of being fed anti-immigrant rhetoric, did not sympathize with the rioters. It's not a mass feeling amongst the working class in Britain that they hate brown people and they think all immigrants should go home. People have been made to feel that immigration's a problem, but fundamentally, most of them are not racist. And you find that when you talk to people, they're worried about what's happening to their lives and they don't really understand why life's getting so hard. And they're told it's immigration. So they think, well, probably we need to do something about immigration then. But that doesn't mean that they think it was all right for those people to run riot the way they did and, target refugees in that particularly heinous way. So because people actually don't sympathize with the rioters, the Labour Party is able to announce brutal anti-people measures in the name of fighting these racists. And people kind of go, oh, well, whatever you need to do to stop this kind of thing is probably all right, right? And what are the things they want to do? And who are the real targets? They don't need new laws to lock up, as I said, arsonists or people who are attempting murder, right? You don't need new laws for that. It was already a law against the law to propagate that type of false information online. No one stops it because it's them who's doing it. So what do they actually want to do? They want to silence dissenting speech. And we're already seeing what that means, Garland. That doesn't mean racists. That means you and me and my party and Uhuru and Scott Ritter and, all the cases we've had recently. There's a founder of Palestine Action.
Sarah Wilkinson.
Sarah Wilkinson, right? The British journalist.
Yeah.
I've got to say, she's quite marginal. I never heard of her before, right?
Me neither.
She's a low-level person who's just working, putting things online on social media, right? I'll come to her in a minute. Sarah Wilkinson. There was who's the founder of Palestine Action? Oh goodness me, Richard Barnard. Okay, Richard Barnard.
Yes.
So he's being taken to court on anti-terrorism charges again. Right. So, and there was Sarah Wilkinson was raided under anti-terrorism laws. So,
if I may add something, coming from law enforcement, I can tell you something. I see a parallel real quick. I'll just throw this in there. If let's say there's a crowd and the crowd's freaking out and the police are afraid that they need to get the crowd under control, what is the first thing that they are trained to do? Find out who the instigators of the crowd is and arrest them. Right. Find out who's yelling, we've got to fight the power or whatever it is and go get them and blah, blah, blah. They grab that person and they take that person away, hoping that the crowd calms down. Do you see the parallel I'm talking about? Okay.
Absolutely. So there are people out there who are instigating these crowds. And if we can silence them, maybe the crowd goes away. Absolutely. That is the logic, Garland. So when they're talking about new laws for online, they want to silence dissenting speech on the street and online. They want to stop the right to protest. They call it saying because it's violent disorder. Look at these riots. We can't have. So they called these rioters protesters. So then they can say, well, the right to protest is clearly being abused, and we've got to do something about that. They want to criminalize all dissent. And they made a point of saying, even if you're online, we'll come after you. Even if you're out of the country, we'll come after you if you're doing things online, right? They've explicitly made those statements. And a lot of people will assume that meant they were targeting people like Tommy Robinson, who's a far-right leader. Well, far-right leader. He's actually some posh dude. His surname's like Yaxley Lennon or something. He's basically he's a state asset, but he lives in, I don't know, Spain, I think. So they make these oblique references and they let you assume that they're trying to target this guy who everybody hates on the far right. In fact, the real target is the Palestine movement. Because as I said before, the Palestine movement is anti-imperialist at its core and they don't have control of it. Now, when it comes to, anti-NATO rhetoric regarding the Ukraine war, it's still pretty marginal. It doesn't have a mass audience yet in the West. It's quite a small group of people who've really understood and paid attention to what's happening there and haven't fallen for all the Russophobic propaganda. But when it comes to the Palestine movement, it's a mass movement. It's a mass movement that the Labour Party is not in control of. It's a mass movement that keeps turning out, despite the best efforts of its self-appointed leadership to make sure it doesn't really do anything much. It keeps coming. People keep coming onto the streets. The anger is building, not going away. It was strong enough to get 4 or 5 members of parliament elected to the British Parliament independents in the last election, which is a massive breakthrough considering how our system works and how hard it is to get anybody elected. So they are very, very concerned about the Palestine movement. So far, their attempts to criminalize it haven't worked. So again, we see this uniparty in action, you know, Labour, Tory, as we say, same old story. Whoever's in power, it's the same ruling class agenda they're following. The Tories tried to say that people marching, it's a hate march, it's anti-Semitic, it's pro-terrorist. They arrested people on those grounds. Our party, as you know, was targeted. Eventually, okay, we were very inconvenienced. We had raids of terror police in the middle of the night, loads of stuff confiscated, people held overnight, you know, 24 hours in jail, whatever, you know, the whole thing. Draconian bail conditions that were carried over for months at a time. Eventually, they've had to drop all the charges on both of those counts. Because the system they have right now is not really able to criminalize truth-telling when your truth is demonstrably true and has been backed up at like the United Nations. It makes it really, really, really difficult, right? So they've got to find a new way round. Now, if you notice, after the riots, Keir Starmer announced that they needed to do certain things to the justice system. It's not fit for purpose. We're not able to process people. So what did they want to do? They wanted to keep courts open 24/7 and speed up the processing of people. What does that mean? That basically means abolition of due process, doesn't it? You don't really have time to consult a lawyer, to see the evidence or rebut the evidence or gather your own evidence or prepare a case. They're processing you through the court and chucking you in prison straight away. That's quick and effective justice. No, that's no justice, isn't it? Right? That's turning the courts into a kangaroo court and a rubber stamping mechanism. I've arrested this guy, you know, process him through and put him in jail for a couple of years. Right? So that's the first thing. We need to overhaul the justice system and make it more fit for purpose. We've got to speed everything up, which means you can't have a proper trial. They said, sorry, what was the other things? There was the court system. Oh, they said we've got to introduce new laws regarding speech online. And what was interesting, when they were in there was a policeman, I think he was in the Met Police in London, Metropolitan Police. He made a statement, a high-up policeman, during this period, and he talked about coming after people. And it was actually, if you listen carefully, he never said specifically that it was connected to these race riots, right? He said, if you're spreading hate online, well, when they arrested our people, they said it was hate speech that we were doing. So when I listened to that, I said, this is not about the riots. This is not about immigration and stopping far-right lunatics. This is about changing the rules by which we police speech so that we can come after the Palestine movement more effectively than we've been able to do before. They're going to have to tweak some things, right, to be able to do it properly, because so far, although they've arrested people and made a lot of noise about it, they're not getting convictions. They end up letting people go. And they want to effectively criminalize this movement. They want to get this protest off the streets. It's quite interesting to see that this weekend there is supposed to be a big Palestine demonstration in central London. And there've already been 18 of these, right, since last year. So it's not like a new thing. There's been a gap over the summer. There haven't been lots of marches. So the organizers notified the police like a month ago that they wanted to hold this demonstration. They know they're used to doing all this stuff and jumping through all the hoops. They put in all their requests for assembly points and routes and times to start and all the rest of that. And then at the last minute, the Mets turned around and said, no, you can't use those assembly points. No, you can't go to the Israeli embassy. And we're going to move the start time back by 2.5 hours. Now, bear in mind, people come from all around the country. Everybody knows national demos start at 12 o'clock. Everybody also knows that if you've got to get back to some far-flung bit of the country on the same day, you can't be leaving at 6:30 in the evening, right? You're going to be leaving at 4:30. So there's a whole thing about just basically making it unworkable, but very last minute, they've kind of done this. Again, they are trying, and their justification is, oh, it's going to cause disruption and disorder, right? So you see, again, you know, protest and disorder being kind of conflated with these. Since the riots, now every protest is a cause of disruption and disorder. And oh well, no, we can't really do that, you know. So step by step, you see this chilling of the right to speak. If you tell the truth about Palestine, you can have your house. I mean, look what happened to Sarah Wilkinson. She literally just collects information about Palestine and puts it online, right? Information that already exists, but she's kind of curating it. And the raid on her house was insanely vindictive, Garland. I mean, probably one of the most fascistic stories I've heard in recent times, given how inoffensive she is as a woman. It's a family home. She's this, you know, perfectly nice lady, you know, living in a little house in a village, in a remote village somewhere, you know, posting things about Palestine on the interwebs, right? Like millions of people are doing. And yet her whole street was filled with anti-terror police. You know, they raided her house in the most vicious way, utterly vicious. Like, the story she tells about it is frankly shocking in terms of how personal it seems. You know, they scattered her mother's ashes around her attic. What's that got to do with any aspect of the job that they think they've gone in to do? They ransacked her house, stole some of her possessions and didn't note down that they'd taken them, hid some of her possessions. You know, she found a medical card that she needs, like, had been buried inside her mattress. Like, they cut a hole in her mattress and stuck it in. And it was only just a coincidence that she found it, right? And this is so vindictive. It's so fascistic. She basically said, my house was looted. You know, they took loads of things, thousands of pounds worth of devices. And the conditions that they took money, and they didn't write down that they'd taken money. They took her passport. They didn't write down that they took her passport. Then they demanded that she's got to go to the police station with her passport. So if she doesn't turn up at a police station with her passport, she's in violation of something. But they took her passport. Or she's like, well, maybe they hid it somewhere and I haven't found it. Because the way that they rearranged a bunch of my things and hid some things was just like kind of utterly bizarre, totally violating. But what has it got to do, apart from sending a really chilling message to the working class that don't you get involved in this sort of thing, you know? And I think that they've picked on her basically because she's unorganized. She doesn't have a mass audience. She doesn't have a mass following. She's not part of an organization that can back her up. She's just an individual, you know, trying to do the right thing, trying to tell the truth, trying to be part of what we're told. We're told that's what social media is for. You know, you too can have a voice. Oh, no, you can't. But it's, you know, the kind of personal, malicious, vindictive, and basically fascistic nature of that raid. You know, even I, with everything that I know about British imperialism, on British soil in a little country village, I found it really shocking listening to her talking about what had happened there.
Something that's interesting about this particular crisis, and one of the things, the guy Shahid Bolson, I listen to him, he hits pretty hard sometimes and he misses occasionally, but he has some interesting stuff. And one of the things that he said is, you know, now they're saying we have crisis, and he says this is not crisis, it's consequences. And there's a difference, right? You know, and I thought about it. Crisis kind of implies, you know, as the insurance companies say, you know, what do they say is
Act of God.
You know, a natural disaster, something that's just happenstance, you know what I mean? An act of God, they'll say, you know, in insurance language, right? So this isn't a crisis, it's consequences. This is what happens when you do this. This is the outcome you get. But this is a pretty unique crisis. Here's what I mean. Normally, they just do this and stuff, and they lie to everybody, and they say, okay, we got to go to war with country X, whatever. We have to do this, and the people trudge along with them, and end up paying the price. Okay. What we have now is something different in that the imperialist and their situation is in free fall. However, we have other countries that are not. The anti-imperialist countries are in the opposite of free fall. China's growing, Russia's growing. These other countries are actually growing and improving. At the same time, the US-led the empire is in collapse, number one. So normally they had such a grip on things that the quote global South countries, the non-aligned anti-imperialist countries, they already kept them real poor. So they weren't really a threat. Okay. So they would fight amongst themselves or whoever the hell. But now there is actually an alternative in the world, and that alternative, BRICS, etc., is expanding as they collapse. And the other thing is this: due to this ability of people to get information, due to an alternative media, the people inside the empire, unlike past crisis/consequences, are starting to become aware of the reality. So the imperialists have a triple problem. A, their systems fall into pieces because they're just a bunch of thieves and criminals. B, an alternative system is arising. And C, they have to be at war not only with the alternative system, but with the people inside their empire. And it's not easy to just mobilize the people inside the empire to say, let's go after this group or that group. The trifecta of problems has created a very unique crisis. Your thoughts?
Well, you've pinpointed something that Lenin pointed out in his book on imperialism, more than 100 years ago, which is that the working class in the imperialist countries has an ally in the people of the oppressed countries, because we fight the same enemy and we benefit from one another's fight. We benefit in the successes for us as workers in the imperialist heartlands. We ultimately benefit from the successes of the colonized peoples or the independent peoples to get free and to build a life that excludes imperialist looting, because that weakens our own class enemy at home. And this is a tangible, important link. This is why solidarity is not a piece of paper, and it's not pity, it's not sympathy. Solidarity means acting together because you understand that we genuinely are in the same struggle. Genuinely, our struggle helps our brothers and sisters abroad. The best way we can help Palestine is to tie up our governments to the point where they're not able to keep perpetuating their support for the Zionist entity, which it completely implodes the second it doesn't have Western backing. Right? It is not an independent actor. It is totally dependent on the West. We therefore have power to give solidarity to Palestine, which is much, much more than choosing what we buy or writing letters to MPs or even going on demonstrations. We have the power to stop our ruling class from doing what it does there. And that ultimately will come back and benefit us. If Palestine gets free, if the Middle East gets free of imperialist looting, what does that mean? It means, it means a massive contraction in the profit-taking ability of our ruling class. And that may sound scary, right? Our economy starts falling apart. But this economy has to fall apart. It's only delivering for this tiny number of people. We then have a situation where our rulers are in total crisis, and that's an opportunity for us. If we can't do our job in that situation, well, that's our problem. Right? But we have a job to get rid of these people whose system is sucking the lifeblood out of us as well as out of the colonized peoples abroad. And we have to recognize that their struggle helps us in that, physically helps us. So it's not a question of sympathy or charity or feeling sorry for people or feeling outraged by nasty crimes. It's a question of recognizing we are actually in the same struggle. So that's just one thing I want to say on, what you were saying there. But, this question of crisis or consequence, well, it's both. Crisis, overproduction crisis, is built into the system of capitalist production. So crisis is a consequence of living in a system of production for profit, which we've talked about before, and I won't go on about again. The system of production for profit creates crisis and cannot but do so because of the contradictions that are inherent in that system, because of the way that wealth concentrates at one pole and poverty at another. And those are natural consequences. And then you have overproduction, gluts in the market, what they call overcapacity, right? You are producing more than the people can buy. Why are you producing more than the people that can buy? Because you don't pay them enough. Why don't you pay them enough? Because you're making for profit and not for need. And so there's this, it's a Gordian knot. It's a cycle you can't get out of, and it only goes downwards. So crisis is a consequence of the economic system in which we live. And therefore, the survival mechanisms of the ruling class to try to keep the system going, to try to get out of the crisis in such a way that they're still on top as they come out of crisis. They have a bunch of survival mechanisms that I talked about earlier. These are becoming more clear to people, as you said, for various reasons that you've talked about. So one is the fact that this is the worst ever crisis that the imperialist system has had. It's the deepest crisis. It's the most global, the most severe. And every single one of the imperialist powers is suffering greatly. There's no young, strong imperialist power that's kind of growing as a result of what's happening and is able to kind of take up the mantle of imperialism out the other side of this. They're all kind of essentially bankrupt, decaying. They've rotted their economies away from the inside because of exporting all of their industries, all the rest of it. So they've become totally parasitic. Their system is very senile in that sense of being very, very old, super mature, hyper mature, really rotten from the inside out, very rotten on the inside. And more of that is showing on the outside. We've talked before about, why does the system why does it seem only able to find the most obscene and incompetent people to be its leaders, or its faces, its public face. This is one of the signs of the decay of the system and its senility, that it can't find, kind of talented individuals to front up for it because the facade is so broken now. It's not possible to portray it as if it's you kind of healthy and vigorous and young and optimistic, the life it's got to offer us. It simply doesn't. All they can do is try to scare us and control us. They can't enthuse us. And that's a real weakness. And of course, as you pointed out, there's a pole of attraction that can offer enthusiasm. That I've talked about this many times. It gets boring for people, but I'm going to do it again. That pole of attraction that gives people hope, that enthuses people that another way is possible, began with the Soviet Union, began after 1917, and particularly after the completion of the first 5-year plan in the Soviet Union. By the mid-1930s, the world could see how extraordinary was the miracle that was taking place in the Soviet Union, how all the intractable problems, were being solved, and how all the contradictions of society that we were told are just inherent in human nature somehow were being overcome. There was no exploiting class. There was no exploiting nation. And the people were living and working. There was no gender inequality. All these things were being addressed in a really civilized way. And the life of the people was being lifted up in a way where nobody was left behind. And this was happening, this huge economic miracle of developing this backward peasant country into a modern industrial superpower with modern industry, modern agriculture, high technology, high culture, high education. All this was happening at the time of the Great Depression in the rest of the world, right? And so it was so clear to people, oh my gosh, these socialists, these communists are onto something. They've released the potential of their people in this most incredible way. And, we lost so much with the fall of the Soviet Union in terms of that sense of hope, that optimism, that we can do something better than this. But they're starting to come back again. When people see, as you say, the strength, the growth of China, they see Russia's ability to reconstitute itself as an independent anti-imperialist bastion in the world, and they see what the power of those two combined does for the oppressed people around the world, then, as you say, you start to see there is another way. It is possible. If we stand together, we can stand up to imperialism. That's the lesson these countries have been learning. After a period of feeling that the USA was almighty, all-powerful, and couldn't be resisted, which was basically what the world was made to feel after the fall of the Soviet Union and after the launch of the first war against Iraq in 1991. The world was made to feel you can't stand up to US imperialism. You have to find a way to live with it and to try to pacify it, to try not to let it target you. Everybody in the 1990s and early 2000s, all they were doing with the USA was going, just don't attack me. I'm not a threat to you. I'm not a threat to you. I'm not a threat to you. Just don't attack me. But steadily over time, these countries got back their confidence. They started to learn the truth about imperialism, and they learned it particularly because through the course of all those wars, that there's no negotiating with these people. They lie. There's no pacifying them unless you are prepared to accept total servitude. That's the deal in imperialism, right? You can't be an equal partner. We've talked about this before as well, I'm sure. Russia tried, China tried to be partners in the world community. And they discovered that the words partnership and the world's community, international community, didn't mean anything, because the system that the USA presides over is an imperialist system. And imperialism, as Lenin pointed out, seeks domination, not democracy. Imperialism does not respect the rights of anybody apart from a club of super rich looters and exploiters at the top. Everybody else is just fodder. Everything else is exploitable material. The only function of the entire system is to grow capital. Big piles of capital have to keep getting bigger. That's it. That's the basis for every decision. And people do not count in this logic and in this rationale. So this pole of attraction is growing again. And as you rightly say, it's interesting to see how just freeing yourself a little bit from the domination of imperialism allows your economy to grow a bit. And, if you're facing imperialism, you have to grow your economy in a way that benefits the masses. Because if the masses hate you and the imperialists hate you, you can't survive. We've talked about this before as well, I'm sure. So you see in all the anti-imperialist countries that whether they are avowedly, openly socialist or not, they will be enacting policies that raise the standard of living for the poor. They will be making sure that they are doing things that benefit the people and make the people feel like they're on the side of their government against imperialism, And so life in those countries is just much more pleasant. The people feel more respected. They don't feel so controlled. They feel that they have a stake in the system that is delivering something for them. And as you said, on the flip side, our rulers are making war not only abroad, but at home. And in the course of their crisis, where they fight, remember, crisis begets or increases competition. Capitalism is a system that's characterized by competition from top to bottom. There's competition amongst the workers for jobs. because there aren't never enough jobs under capitalism. Never. Under capitalism, there's never enough jobs. So there's competition amongst the workers for jobs. There's competition amongst the capitalists for sources of profit. And then there's competition between the workers and the capitalists over the share of the wealth that the workers produce. You know, does more go to wages or more go to profits, right? So in every direction, there's competition. Now, crisis makes the competition sharper and more acute on every level. There's more competition amongst the workers because there's fewer jobs. There's more competition amongst the capitalists. Even the super rich are fighting one another as much as they're fighting together against the poor. When those splits are opening up, the ruling class media becomes factional. And what does that mean? It means they start throwing rocks at each other in public. And this is very useful for the working class because we're able to see the rocks they're throwing. And there's a lot of truth spoken amongst people who are falling out. They let things out the bag that ordinarily in nice times, they wouldn't want the working class really to know. You know, for example, we were told by one section of the ruling class to be suspicious about the motivations of the courts because they were attacking another section of the ruling class over something to do with Brexit. I can't remember the details now, but I remember thinking, you idiots, you idiots, you want us to believe in the justice system, but now you're fighting each other over some aspect of something or other. And you're asking the working class to side with you. And in order to get them to side with you and try to win the point that you want to make, you're telling us, you're showing us how the courts are being manipulated. But we've been brought up to believe that you can't manipulate the courts, that justice is something that comes from on high, is abstract and classless and pure. But now in your infight, you've just let the cat out of the bag that the justice system is totally manipulated and that judges, who we've been taught to see like they're like higher than God. They're so perfect and pure, and the truth comes down through them. They just channel the voice of God, you know. Now you're telling us these judges have vested interests and what they are, right? And now you've set a train of thought going amongst the people that you can't take back, right? So as you say, Garland, this crisis is creating a situation in which more and more nuggets of truth come out, and those truths can't be taken back again.
Last question, last issue, in fact, and that is France and Germany, French politics, German politics, which are simply representative of so many what's going on in throughout the U.S. empire, right? The people in East Germany, you know, Thuringia and places like that, all of a sudden they're voting for the AfD, they're voting for Sarah Wagenknecht's parties, they're voting for any damn body, as I like to say, any places, the infamous Malcolm X speech, in any place is better than here, right? The French, they want out of neoliberalism. You know, they're looking for anything. We'll vote for whatever we can. So they vote for alternatives. We want out. Here in the US, they put forward, you know, a decrepit old skeleton, Joe Biden. It's needless to say, he flopped, and they come out with a hollow instrument of power, Kamala Harris, who can barely put a sentence together, probably not even as good as Joe Biden. The issue of electoral politics and the trajectory of them throughout the empire. Okay, Germany and France, the people vote for something else. What we could discuss what it is. Macron and Schultz is like, well, perhaps we should outlaw the parties that the people are voting for. And here, you know, the whole issue with Harris and cracking down. They seem, you know, prior to the election, they're saying we've got to crack down because there's election interference from China, Russia, Iran, whoever. The issue of electoral politics in the empire and the crash thereof and the contradictions that are being shown. We're here for democracy. So the people say, I want this party. Yeah, well, you can't have that party in this democracy. Anyway, your thoughts.
Absolutely. And it wouldn't surprise me at all, Garland, if we start to see moves to persecute the independents who've been elected to Parliament in Britain under the same type of, you know, anti-terror measures, or, you know, because they're Muslims, or most apart from Jeremy Corbyn, who I'm sure will be left alone. But
Or they're working for Russia or China. That's the other thing, you know.
They're Muslims, they're terrorist supporters. You know, it will be something like that if it happens. But I wouldn't be at all surprised, just as, you know, as you said, you know, the German government's response to the massive vote for parties which basically ran on a platform, right, left, they ran on a platform of anti-war and anti-austerity. And that's exactly, you know, what was the platform, the popular platform that people voted for in the British general election here. You know, that they thought that the Green Party stands for those things. It doesn't. But they've got good spin meisters in the mainstream media who present them as being anti-genocide and anti-austerity. In fact, they're pro-NATO and pro-imperialist. But people vote for them thinking that they're not, right? So a lot of people voted trying to find someone, not Labour and not Tory. And this is the crisis, right? That, you know, the same thing in Germany, the same thing in France. People didn't want to vote for Macron. They wanted to get Macron out, and they wanted to get someone in who would be anti-war and anti-austerity. That's what they were promised. And then when it looked like they might be going to get their way, what happened? They lashed up this, they called it a new popular front. And it's a travesty of the concept of the popular front, right? The actual popular front was anti-fascist. But in this so-called new popular front, they're combining with the bloody fascists, the real fascists. You know, they call Marine Le Pen the fascist, and it's like everyone against Marine Le Pen. But the real fascists are Macron and even the Social Democrats, who are funding fascists in Ukraine, who are fueling racism at home, who are doing everything to save French imperialism, save NATO, save the imperialist system at the expense of the working class, including repressive measures, including drumming up racist pogroms. That is the essence of fascism. It's the naked dictatorship of imperialism, the imperialist ruling class in a time of crisis. That's what fascism is. It's not a uniform. It's not a set of rules. It's getting the working class to fight itself, you know, finding scapegoats while you crack down on the ruling class, on its organization, on its free speech, on its ability to have an independent political voice in order to, you know, basically create a kind of martial law situation where you're just, you know, trying to drum up, trying to maximize profits for a crisis-ridden system by hyper-exploitation of the workers at home and war abroad, right? That's really what fascism is all about. It's about saving imperialism in crisis. And the people who are fronting up in the most fascistic way across Europe right now, or certainly in Western Europe, they don't look like what we think fascists are supposed to look like. You know, it's Keir Starmer and Olaf Scholz and Emmanuel Macron, right? These are the people who are the real danger to the working class. But we are being encouraged to say, oh no, Tommy Robinson's the danger, so get in behind Keir Starmer. Oh no, Marine Le Pen's the danger, so get in behind Macron. But actually, if you look at what they've done in France, for example, by facilitating the survival of Macron, this so-called new popular front, actually all they've done is oil the wheels for Marine Le Pen to present herself in the next election like, I'm the only real anti-establishment voice there is, mate. And for all you know, by that point, the establishment will be right behind her and decided that, yeah, she's a good candidate because she's not anti-establishment. That's the, you know, the thing with the far right, and why the far right and the far left are not the same is because they might go to an election saying things that sound similar. We don't want austerity. We don't want war. They'll say those things. The problem is true voices of the working class, communist, socialist, real ones, mean it. And they what they're saying is, we are going to raise the standard of living for the workers at the expense of the rich. The far right are demagogues. Their job is to harness those people who want that, tell them they're going to do it, give them a scapegoat, get themselves elected, and then become good little tools of the ruling class of imperialism. That's the job of that's the difference between the so-called far right and the so-called far left, you know, in bourgeois politics. I mean, you know, fundamentally, you can't elect a socialist government to power. You have to put it in power by changing the system. But the far right, you can elect them. And they will say things that sound good to people who are suffering. The problem is you can't trust them. They lie. In the end, they're servants of the system. Look what happened with the brothers woman in Italy. Don't know why I can't remember her name. Meloni, Giorgia Meloni. Yeah, look what happened with her. She was talking a good talk, wasn't she, till she got elected, and then she turned out to be NATO's best friend. You know, and I hear commentators saying, "Oh, well, she's just trying to this, or she's just trying to this, or she, you know, it's just real politics." It's just, she's a good little servant of the system. She got herself elected, talking a good game. She still makes a point every now and again of distancing herself in words from aspects of the system that are very unpopular. And as a result, she survives electorally when you would think that she wouldn't. But what's she delivered to the Italian people based, you know, compared to what she promised them? Nothing. They're still in NATO, they're still in the war, their economy is still going down the pan, you know, because they're part of the anti-Russia sanctions, etc., 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 etc. You know, her party's program is to save Italian imperialism, but their role is to get a section of the working class and petty bourgeois on side for that program in some way or another, and trick them into following them and misdirect their anger.
If I may, one more thing. I think it's important to hit on, and that is that the role of the person who wants to save the system and pretends that they want to fight the system, right? And here's what I mean. Here we've got AOC or Bernie or whoever, right? And they're like, the system's terrible. I got to fight the system. We got to fight the system. You know, the so-called lefties, or as you said, the Melonis of the world, the so-called conservative populists who say, you know, yes, it's terrible. I stand against the system, blah, blah, blah. Come with me. We must fight the system, right? But when you look at their actions and when you look at their solutions, what they're really saying is the system is mismanaged. System's fine. All we need is a different managers. All we need is to tweak the system a little bit. And when you hear what they say, there's some fundamental things within the context of the system that they either go along with or ignore. You know, there'll be, when you say to the AOCs of the world and the Bernies of the world and certain fake leftists, what about what's happening in Gaza and how terrible it is? Yeah, it's bad. But our party, our group is actually better. And just stick with our party. Yes, are they doing wrong now? But we have to bring more people like us into the party, and we can drag this party to the left and put, you know what I mean? You know, it is the people. Yes, all we have to do is tweak the system. And to me, they are worse in a way than the people who are just straight out, yeah, we're part of the system and we're here to save the system. And you're like, but the system's collapsing. No, it's not. It's great. It's the best system. Or sure, it's a terrible system, but it's the best system possible. So you must take this as the lesser of all evils, right? They're those. I prefer the person who says, I'm straight out for the system and I'll make any kind of excuses, as the person who pretends, yeah, I'm anti-system person. But when you look at them, they just want to save the system. They want to tweak the system and really kind of convince you to join them to save the system, saying it can be tweaked, it can be changed, and we can come together and do it.
Yes. Just grab these books, because this is a book written by my father some decades ago. Social Democracy, that's the ideology of the Labour Party, right? And it says the enemy within. The enemy within, right? You are absolutely right. You're absolutely right, Garland, that, and this one we did produce more recently, Britain's perfidious Labour Party. Good name, hey? The Labour Party, social democracy, in your country, it's the Democrats, right? These represent far more dangerous enemy to working people, precisely because they're presented as the workers' friend, when in reality they serve the enemy class. And while you persist in the illusion that they're your friend, you're doomed. You can't ever fight effectively. You will never win through to the place where you actually want to be. You know, what is it that we want? Fundamentally, we want to be able to live life in peace, in prosperity, with culture, with security, with meaningful work, with meaningful community ties. You know, those things are not insane. Everyone on the planet has a right to them. They're all perfectly possible to achieve, you know, with access to healthcare and enough clothing and then, you know, decent food. And, you know, all of those things can be done, but not under this system. And the people who try to trick you that the system can be managed better, just put me in charge and I'll make it work. Those people, as you say, are far more dangerous than the people who say, well, you know, the poor are always with us. We just have to accept inequality as part of life, it's part of society, it's part of human nature, it's the way things are. There's no point trying to change it. You can't. You know, those people say what they mean and mean what they say, and you can deal with them. It's like I always say in our country, you know, it's like the Sun newspaper, which is obviously, you know, anti-working class and, you know, in its propaganda and very crude, racist, and people can see it for what it is, right? Or the Guardian, which presents itself as this bastion of, you know, liberal democracy, of educated, informed thought, you know, for cultured people who care, but actually is, I used to hear my dad referring to the Guardian when I was a kid as a Zionist rag. Right? So you get the point, right? It's a concealed enemy, and because it's concealed, it's extremely effective in brainwashing people. Now, everybody calls the Sun brainwashing because it's so racist, but actually people know what the Sun's trying to tell you to think. They don't recognize. I mean, I find the most brainwashed people are Guardian readers because they're absolutely convinced that they're critical thinkers while they're taking on board all of the lies that the Guardian spins at them, right? So the enemy within is super dangerous. And this idea, fundamentally, this idea that we can manage the contradictions of the system in such a way that it delivers for working people is demonstrably false. You only have to read the wonderful works of Mr. Karl Marx that sat on the library there behind me to understand that. People, you know, decades of anti-communism, Garland, have had this effect. People don't find out what Marx said because they feel Marx, Lenin, Engels, Stalin are people that they shouldn't go near. They've been inculcated with anti-communism at such a root level that even the people who really question the system can't bring themselves to pick up the tools we've been given to understand and fight the system. These tools mean you can understand the system and fight it properly. But we're so drenched in anti-communism, we're scared to even touch them, to even let ourselves open the book and find out what's in there. I knew somebody once, many years ago, who I had a close relationship with, and I was really shocked to find him say to me, he was a very nice, very intelligent guy, well-educated, he'd done a politics degree. I really wanted him to just, I thought, you don't have to agree with it, you don't have to agree with me, but I'd really like you to just read a page of Lenin and see what, he done a politics degree, right? And he liked reading, and he was interested in the world. But he's a bit older than me, and you know our generations, right? You know, the world we grew up in and how anti-communist it was. And he's a Guardian reading kind of liberal type, right? Nice, very nice man. I said to him, just read one page. And he was like, no, he was so resistant. I said, one page of Lenin. Just read what, I don't have to read it. I know what it says, was what he said to me. But this is classic. This is not just him, right? This is the mindset we've been given, and the free thinkers amongst us are some of the worst, actually, in terms of our internalized anti-communism. And that precisely comes from the collision of those two things you pointed out. Number one, there's a hidden enemy inside our class that we don't recognize. And because we don't recognize it, we're not prepared to combat it. We're not prepared to question it. And on the other side, that enemy has been propagating for 200 years the lie that better management of the system and persuasion of the people at the top of the system are the way we're going to fix our problems, when a study of Marxist science will show you that that is totally impossible to achieve in that way. We have to change the entire system of production.
Why, thank you very much. I certainly appreciate you. You gave us some extra time today. Where can people find out? I know there's Proletarian TV on YouTube, but where else? In fact, I saw that they shared one of our or some of our conversations, which I thought was great. Where do people need to go to find out all about your stuff, Joti Brar?
Thank you, Garland. Yes, so this website, thecommunists.org, is my party's website. We have a channel on Telegram, The Communists. Do subscribe to that because you get all of our stuff unfiltered. We are on Twitter. I'm just not a big believer that Twitter really works for anybody. I don't think all the people who are following us on Twitter see our stuff, essentially.
No.
I personally have a channel on Telegram. While Telegram is still there, before they managed to get that closed down as well, you can follow me there, Joti Brar. Yes, Proletarian TV is our YouTube channel, and we do re-upload these conversations. It was quite funny, actually, Garland. That conversation that we uploaded a couple of weeks ago was one that somehow we hadn't uploaded the time it happened. So it's quite an old one. And we just kind of put it up. Oh, well, you might like to see this. But because you and I hadn't spoken recently, and I guess maybe a few people missed it, we had a big spike on our channel of views that would normally be coming to your channel looking for me and you having a chat. Came over and had a look at this really quite old conversation. So that was quite interesting.
Well, you know, it's a good idea. What you probably should do is every now and then every couple of weeks, put one of our old conversations up, because I do think I'll watch our older conversations sometimes, or some of my old shows. And what I find is that you look at the dynamics that are going on now, and you look at a discussion that we had 4 months ago, and you're like, wow, you know, we were really on the money. And you see some of the things that we discussed, because as you said, these things were discussed 100 years ago, 150 years ago. So it's not time, you know, appropriate to a particular time. So I do think it's a good idea for people who are watching this show to go back and watch some of the old shows with Joti and I, and for you to put some of those old shows every couple of weeks, throw an old one up, and I think you'll see the same. I think you'll see the same dynamic.
I know we have to go, but can I just add to that? Because you've
pinpointed. Well, I'm not in a rush. If you can take
pinpointed something really important, which I always say to our comrades. You know, the analysis our party produces is not news; it's analysis. And because of that, it might use current facts or current events to make its analysis, but it never gets old. You can read articles from our papers that are 40 years old or 20 years old, and it lives today. And it's the reason why we'll sit down and study the works. You know, the complete works of Lenin include letters and articles he wrote, you know, about current events from more than 100 years ago. And yet you learn so much from reading those, because what you're learning is not just about history or things which happened a long time ago. What you're learning is how to make sense of these events through scientific application of Marxism. And so every letter, every article written by Lenin is a lesson in applying Marxism, and in our own small and rather humble way. You know, we might not be on Lenin's standard, but that's what we try to also do. We try to show you how to apply, how to understand what's happening by applying socialist science. And because of that, you know, it is an analysis that, as you say, it lasts.
And last thing I'll say is, here's a perfect example. You familiar with this book?
Yes, absolutely. By a great British communist.
Yes. Was that written, what, the 20s, 30s, something like
30s,
that?
Early 30s.
Yes. And let me do another one from the Imperialist. Can we learn a lot from this? Ally versus Ally, written in the 1980s by Tony Blinken. America, Europe, and the Siberian pipeline crisis.
Oh my gosh.
He wrote an article in the where what was Tony Blinken's argument against? It was against the Europeans getting oil and energy from then the Soviet Union. And you wonder why they blew Nord Stream. And in the book, he talked about the Europeans seeing their relationship with Russia getting natural resources from the perspective of economics, wherein the imperialists saw it through the lens of geopolitical advantage. Well, the Russians will get stronger, and we don't want that. And the Europeans will get stronger, and we won't be able to tell them what to do.
I
You take
remember
that.
back in the 90s, sorry, just to come in on that.
Go ahead,
I
sure, go
remember
ahead.
back in the 90s, I'm pretty sure it was in the 90s, my dad saying that, you know, it was not impossible at that point that a new Eurasian superpower could have arisen basically on the back of an alliance between Germany and post-Soviet Russia, because post-Soviet Russia had energy and nuclear weapons, and Germany had industry and a lot of finance capital. And if those two got together, they'd be a real rival, a peer rival to the USA. And that there was always that possibility was hanging over the Americans, you know, through the, and if you saw at the time of the 2003 Iraq War, the fact that the French and the Germans didn't go along with that war, that the European Union was trying to be a peer competitor to the USA at that period and have independent policy and independent existence. And that got knocked on the head in various ways over a period of time. But there was a distinct possibility, you know, that they were going to stay separate, have their own agenda, their own interest, not imperialists, but be rivals rather than, you know, junior partners. So it's been interesting to see how that changed. But yeah, that fear of that has definitely hung over the US ruling class for a long time.
That's part of the war. I'll add this. Emmanuel Macron talking about the European, they need a European army, right? A European military, etc. That was also part to me of a discussion that there is an element of the ruling class in Europe that looks at the US empire as a competitor that says, you know, they don't know how to do imperialism and colonialism like we do. We need to separate them. I think there's an element of the European ruling class that we will see as the U.S. starts to collapse even more, as their grip on Europe loosens, and as inevitably as I think it will. You'll see the rise of the rule rather than let's have independent sovereign nations in Europe. You'll see the ruling class in Europe turn to, we need our own military. We need everything. Now we need to go out and prosecute imperialism because we really know how to do it. We got a lot more experience. These young knuckle draggers, they're just too brash and boorish. They don't understand really. You have to hold your pinky up, and you have to use a nice
subtle, Garland.
What's that?
They're not subtle. They're not subtle, the Americans. The fundamental kind of superiority complex of the Europeans is, you know, these Americans, they're just so unsubtle. They don't understand how to have nice manners while you're holding a dagger behind your back.
Exactly. As I've said before, it's the imperialist diplomacy is the art of saying nice doggy until you can find a rock, right? The Americans don't say nice doggy. They just come in with the rock.
They just come in.
All right, Joti Brar, thanks a lot. Everyone, follow Joti on their social media platforms, Telegram, etc. Share this on all your social media platforms. As you know, there's a lot of shadow banning going on, particularly of people like Joti and I, and even you. So thanks a lot. Everyone have a great day. We're out.